No UFC this weekend, but that doesn't mean that there isn't things to talk about. Doesn't mean that there isn't cool stuff. I mean, for example, ONE FC is capitalizing on this very well with a first, I want to say first ever Amazon Prime live broadcast for the company. That's interesting, and it's a super stack card. I'm going to go into detail on it. There's also ONE FC 160. Not going to go super deep into that card because honestly, to a degree, it's that there isn't a ton of like super interesting stuff on it. But there's also the fact that it's on like something like 12 hours from now, and by the time anyone is listening to this, the fight card may already have happened, and as a result, there's not really a lot of prediction on the matter. That's the Rayun Ok versus Christian Lee card. That's a rematch of a fight that happened 11 months ago, I believe. We haven't seen either fighter since. So there's no real reason to assume that anything has really changed. So I'm going to go with Christian Lee to lose again. We'll find out. And Thon Lee versus Kai Tang. That's an interesting, fun fight, but like it's one that Lee should probably win and continue his sort of rise. Really beating Gary Tonin kind of put him on the map as a legitimate guy. I believe at featherweight. They're kind of weird about this whole thing because one has a number of rehydration tests that lead to fighters essentially fighting a weight class above where they would anywhere else. That's not necessarily a bad thing, and it's going to play into a topic I have later on to talk about, actually, because with no UFC card this weekend, I did open up the mailbag, the Discord, the Twitch, the Facebook for questions and so on to bring some things in, and I got some good ones, and we'll go through them depending on if we have time. But there are a couple I definitely want to go through. In terms of UFC news, Cedric Dombe has been released by the company, I believe. There has been no company statement, but like a lot of outlets are reporting that he's gone. He's a Glory kickboxing champion who was slated to be on the UFC Paris card, which was nixed by the UFC or by the French Athletic Commission or whatever. Let me see if I can get the actual name here. French MMA Federation would not sanction the bout because there must fighters with rule that fighters with less than 10 professional bouts must not have more than 4 fight differential between them. So the fact that Doumbé, who has a immense kickboxing record, 83 fights in kickboxing, 75 wins, has only 2 MMA fights. The proposed fight with Darian Weeks was called off, and admittedly, it would be very, very difficult for the UFC to book a 2-0 fighter. They had this similar issue with Dean Barry when they signed him. Now, with Dean Barry, I never understood why they signed him. There was nothing really interesting about him, whereas like Doumbé is a really amazing striker. Do I know that he's going to turn into a good MMA fighter? No. He's in his late 20s, now 30, coming over to MMA, having retired from kickboxing to focus on MMA. I have no doubt that he could be pretty good, but there will be difficulties getting him booked against people of a UFC caliber. And it looks like they also have released Yusuf Zalal, pardon me. That's a shame. I was never big on Yusuf Zalal in the way that some people were, because some people were like hyping him to be like something big. And I never had that opinion. I never had that read. But he was interesting enough, and he had just changed weight classes. It would have been nice to see him get a second chance after the draw with Javon Blackshear, which we did not get in the end. Did not end up getting that. So, disappointing in that regard, but kind of understandable at the same time. He had lost, or he'd been winless at 4 straight. And if your name is not Sam Alvey, that usually equals walking papers. And even Sam Alvey is finally gone. So there you go. We'll have to find a new, but insert fighter is still employed with the company with Alvey gone. So let's talk about this ONE FC card on Prime, and they stacked this card. Like, you've got Demetrious Johnson versus Adriano Moraes. That's a really interesting fight. Moraes, of course, knocked out, or at least TKO'd Demetrious Johnson in their previous collision. And as a result, built-in storyline there. Mighty Mouse, the world's best flyweight for a long time. Probably still historically the best flyweight in MMA history. And a guy who has not looked amazing since leaving the UFC. And when I say that, I mean not that he's been bad or anything like that, because the loss to Moraes has a little bit of a freakishness to it. He has won 3 MMA bouts under the ONE FC banner. He has beaten Rod Tang in a custom rules Muay Thai / MMA bout, which is always a little bit weird. Rod Tang, pardon me. I think I mispronounced that. And still definitely very, very good. But even the fights that he's won against Danny Kingad, Tatsumitsu Wada. Pardon me. I am repetitively bad with Japanese names. I have to slow them down and really break it down. My apologies. Which is weird because, of course, big Pride fan back in the day. You think I would have that down, but I don't. Fights that were probably far more competitive than they had any right to be. And as a result, it's been a bit lukewarm. But, getting a chance to avenge his loss to Moraes here. And Moraes is a good fighter. Moraes has got powerful striking, pretty good grappling game. A guy who's pretty well-rounded, has the athletic ability that you would look for. Despite not having fought in the UFC, definitely a guy who I'd classify as UFC caliber. 5 inches taller than Mighty Mouse, 3.5 reach advantage. So, obvious dynamic there, which is he's longer, he's longer, taller, and a good range striker. And Mighty Mouse had some significant difficulties dealing with that in his first fight. And in the end, the finish came with a kind of wild exchange where he hurt him with an uppercut, finished him on the ground. And he was doing very well up at that point. Like, there was nothing flukish or Hail Mary nature or anything like that for Moraes in the first fight. He was having a fight that at no point did it feel like he was getting outclassed in with Mighty Mouse Johnson. And that's why this is fantastic. That's why this is a fantastic bout. One that, has a wide audience to be available on, because a lot of people have the Prime TV service just through Amazon Prime and so on. The ubiquitous nature of Amazon within our lives right now. And I don't have a ton of drastic insight to offer because, again, it's a rematch of a fight that happened relatively recently. This happened back in April 2021. We have seen Mighty Mouse fight once since then, but not under an MMA ruled set. That was the Rod Tang fight. And in Moraes' case, we have seen him fight Yuya Wakamatsu and guillotine him. And Wakamatsu is not a bad fighter, but like the prep level that is for Demetrious Johnson is completely without value. Although ironically, they actually submitted Wakamatsu with the same move, the guillotine choke, which is an interesting parallel. I have to go with the X factor here. That is, Mighty Mouse is an incredibly smart fighter, incredibly good at game planning, incredibly good at finding gaps in skill, and adjusting on the fly, and adjusting between fights. Look at the Joe B fight, for example. A fight that the first time around was very close, nip-tuck, and then the second time, Mighty Mouse took him to school. Now, granted, part of that was that he was able to very quickly finish Joe B the second time he fought Joe Benavidez. Finishing him in 2 minutes, 8 seconds. But, like, even within that fight, he felt way more comfortable, felt like he had figured out a lot more about Joe Benavidez. And you have to think that every loss he's ever taken is sort of re-galvanized him and brought him back stronger. Like when he lost to Brad Pickett in his WEC debut, he was much, much better the next time out against Nick Pace, and then Damasio Page, and then Kiki Yamamoto. And then when he lost to Dominic Cruz, of course, that brought about the drop to flyweight. The fights with Ian McCall, which are legendary quality, and a dominant run up the ladder after the split decision win over Joe B the first time they fought. And even the Henry Cejudo loss that he took, he came out and looked like he was trying out some new things and doing some new stuff when he came over to one. And hopefully this crystallizes into a game that will find the gaps in Moraes' abilities, because I just have that level of faith in Mighty Mouse. I have that level of faith in his coaches, in he himself, to develop a game plan, because Moraes is very good, is very dangerous. He's tall. He's long. He's got a great strike. He's got a very, very good striking game. I don't want to use the word great. I think I overused the word great. He's got a ground game. He's strong, physically imposing in the clinch. He had answers for some of Mighty Mouse's takedown entries the first time they fought. So this is a very, very interesting fight. But it's one that, despite the fact that he lost the first fight, I have to go with Mighty Mouse. I have more faith in him to make the necessary adjustments than I do in Adriano Moraes' ability to make those adjustments. But at the same time, we've seen Mighty Mouse lose this fight once. There's no way I can be surprised if it happens again. So, there you go. I'm skipping over the Muay Thai bouts because I don't follow Muay Thai in detail enough to really have any kind of solid opinion on the matter. It's not that I dislike Muay Thai. Like I will watch these Muay Thai bouts, but there's only so many hours in the day. And when it comes to combat sports, while I am a fan of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I'm a fan of wrestling, I'm a fan of boxing, I'm a fan of kickboxing, I'm a fan of Muay Thai, I'm a fan of combat karate, if you want to get right down to it. But there's only so much that you can take in. And to me, mixed martial arts has always been the king. Now, does that mean that has to be your definition of what is the best mixed martial or combat sport on the planet? No, absolutely not. But what I do, it brings everything in and allows me to enjoy it all on one platter. One restaurant, so to speak. And that's why I focus on it. But it will. I think it will be great. So, anyways, slipping on down to 17-time Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu World Champion. I believe that is an accurate figure. Marcos Buchecha versus Kirill Grishenko. Now, Buchecha's Buchecha. There you go. His run in MMA, we'll just call him Marcus for the rest of this, has been pretty damn impressive. In the sense that, not that he's winning, because we've seen a lot of jiu-jitsu guys come over to MMA and instantly pick up a number of wins, because they're coming in and they're fighting people who are not nearly as experienced in combat arts as they are, despite having more MMA experience or whatever. Hodger Gracie ran through a bunch of people and then hit a brick wall. Ironically, that brick wall was Tim Kennedy. Marcus, the difference here is that it's heavyweight. And heavyweight, I've said this before, I'll say it again, the crossover ability into heavyweight from other combat sports has been notably higher at all times. Because the athletic ability, the well-roundedness just isn't really there. It's a division where Tai Tuivasa is fighting Cyril Gahn for the right to be the best active heavyweight on the UFC roster, essentially. And Tai Tuivasa's skill set is effective, exciting, hell of a thing to watch, but it's very, very narrow. And that's what allows something like this to really have way more fruit earlier on than you'd expect. And Marcus is explosive. He's strong. He's fast. He seems to be taking to striking what little striking we've seen from him fairly well, in the sense that not that there's a great deal of depth in his technical game, or that I expect to see him be able to outstrike anyone in the near future, but that he's not uncomfortable as a striker. And a lot of jiu-jitsu guys and judo players and so on, are legitimately uncomfortable when they're forced to stand up. And Marcus doesn't have that. He wants to get to the ground. He realizes where the bread and butter is. But he's talked about wanting to explore his kickboxing options and to develop a well-rounded, proper MMA game. But he still hasn't fought anybody. Grushenko is somebody. The timing here is a little bit weird, because Grushenko is coming off of his first career loss, which means his stock is a little bit down. He lost to, I'm blanking on the name, and Anatoly Malkin beat him. And Malkin's name's going to come up later, because I'm going to talk about it with the other heavyweight bout too. I actually kind of really want to do like a run through his fights, because while his size, I think, is a definite problem for him, he's a fighter that if you're not familiar with, you should become familiar with, because he's a very good heavyweight. And with Grushenko, his win over Rugrug kind of gave him some notoriety. Rugrug, admittedly a meme fighter, a Senegalese traditional wrestler who had come on and was showing off a lot of flashy stuff without a lot of terribly large substance. And Grushenko was able to deal with that, was able to stuff his takedowns, was able to outstrike him, and somewhat controversially finish him at the end of the second round. In the sense that he hit him with a late blow in the throat area, and that seemed to be what actually ended the fight. So it was very weird. But anyways, that was when he was probably at his all high, and then they gave him a not terribly impressive opponent who he worked over, and then he lost to Malkin. And this brings up the question of how good is he? And the other thing that has to be said here is that Grushenko's fallback is as a grappler. He's a Greco-Roman wrestler who has definitely taken a couple of wushu sanda classes in his life, because he loves to spin. Loves to spin. And mix it in. But is otherwise kind of a fairly limited striker who doesn't really keep the range well. And that's why I'm definitely leaning towards the jiu-jitsu side of this thing with Marcus, because while I believe he'll have to work hard for the takedowns, because Grushenko does have that immense core strength, very hard to get down, he will give up the clinch. As in, he will give up the opportunities to clinch, because he's not great at avoiding the clinch. He's not great at breaking the clinch. He's just, his idea, probably because the clinch has been a weapon for him in most of his fights, is we're in the clinch and I haven't really worked on the idea of how to avoid this, because I want this. I want the clinch. Because he's a Greco-Roman guy. So if you're going to clinch with a athletic, powerful, strong, top of the line, absolute top of the food chain BJJ guy, I kind of have to think that you're going to lose. That's why I got Buchecha by decision. I don't know why I have such a hard time with that name. But this is I don't know if this is necessarily going to be a great fight. I want to make that quite clear. I could very easily see this either being a really quick fight, one way or the other, a really boring fight, but it will be an interesting fight because it's that first real big test for Buchecha, and what can he do? Is there something here? How old is he? I don't know off the top of my head. I know within like a decade. 32. Okay, so yeah. And a heavyweight, there's time to work with that. So yeah, taking Buchecha, which I assume is what they're trying to do here. And this is the one thing I dislike about. Actually, I'm going to backpedal. I don't necessarily like. I don't necessarily love that often ONE FC has like a specific goal to have one person win, because any fight promotion has that. The UFC does fights in which one person is supposed to win, and ONE just does that a lot more frequently because just a lack of depth on the roster. The one thing I will say is that when things don't go according to plan for ONE, they tend to really actually like actively punish the guys who won. Like if Grushenko wins this fight against Buchecha, I could see him actually just like them not in any way trying to promote him into becoming a bigger star. Like that's the hilarity of it. Like Adriano Moraes can tell you about that because after he beat Mighty Mouse, the bump in his stock with the promotion was so low. Another heavyweight fight, Amir Ali Akbari versus Mauro. I think it's Cirilini. I think. Seen a couple of his fights, but I've also heard his name pronounced a couple of different ways. So if you're not familiar with Amir Ali Akbari, we're talking about a top of the food chain wrestler. So this is like similarly with Buchecha, but with wrestling. He's been in MMA for a while. He's actually banned from wrestling for PED use. So that's always the funny thing when ONE FC talks about how good their anti-doping policy is. Anyways. I kind of have to pick Cirilini in the fight because here's the thing. Ali Akbari's been stopped by strikes in both of his last two fights, if I'm not mistaken, and 3 times in total, including by Mirko Cro Cop in the year 2016, which is not a great look. Didn't really look at it too badly there. I mean, Cro Cop is still it's still a stylistically good matchup for Cro Cop. But the last 2 knockouts he had were against Malakin and Ji-Won Kang, who are good fighters. In fact, I think actually are perhaps better fighters than Cirilini. But it showed that he has terrible. He has the worst combination of things, and that is a willingness to strike, the thought that he knows how to strike, and in some ways he does. Offensively, he's actually not bad, but he's a guy who has all that confidence, but all the flaws that typically exemplify someone coming over from a grappling discipline and trying to learn to strike. And that is that he's incredibly counterable. Everything is telegraphed. Doesn't seem to have a very good chin. Doesn't seem to have a great chin. Doesn't seem to have great defensive instincts. Doesn't seem to have good instincts when he does get hit. And Cirilini is a guy who just fought Arjan Bullard, or a little bit ago anyways. And Arjan Bullard is not even the same type of wrestler, because Arjan Bullard is actually a freestyle wrestler. Ali Akbari is a Greco-Roman wrestler, so there's that difference right there. There's also the fact that in terms of the wrestling world, Ali Akbari is a world champion. Bullard is a Commonwealth and Pan Am game champion, so that's a lower level, but they both went to the Olympics. They're both Olympic level wrestlers. And Cirilli was able to really kind of absolutely limit the wrestling opportunities that Bouillard had and the success that he had. Now, Bouillard did win the fight, but he won the fight in a manner that I don't think Ali Akbari, because of a tendency to get tired and those defensive liabilities as a striker, really can't do. Bouillard's success was walking him down and being offensively very basic, but defensively actually pretty good. Bouillard has developed an actually good high guard, protect my chin, protect my head, parry, open up some countering opportunities. He's still not a good striker by any means, but with the threat of his wrestling, he's putting together a proper pressure game. And that's something Ali Akbari I don't think actually has. Ali Akbari has been developing a striking game that doesn't really emphasize his wrestling. One, and like I said, doesn't have nearly the comfort level. Not comfort level. Doesn't have nearly the defensive acumen that Bouillard has. So I honestly think Cirilli will find that chin. Will knock him out. Now, am I going to be stunned if Ali Akbari goes out there and walks him down and forces him to clinch and to wrestle and to grapple with him? No, you're facing an Olympic wrestler. That's obviously something that is potentially on the cards. But it's not like Cirilli is completely out of water on the ground. He is a judo background guy. He does have a guard. He does have the ability to be safe. And that's the thing, is that I don't trust Ali Akbari's defensive striking, and I don't trust his cardio to take a decision. So I am going with Cirilli. That's my big upset on the card. There's two other cards here that are two other fights here that are, I don't want to say lesser in meaning, because I think Itsuki Hirata versus Hishin Lin is a important fight for they call it the atomweight division, but their limit's like 110 or like 112 or something. And of course, the weigh-in results tend to be more like strawweight weigh-ins because of the hydration test weigh-in. I'm taking Hirata in that fight. I like what Lin is putting together. She's a tall striker who could put up some good output, is very scrappy, quick thinking, and as a grappler is actually fairly active and reasonably aggressive. The only thing is that active and aggressive don't necessarily on their own equal good. It's not like she has a litany of submission losses or anything like that, but she's active in a way that implies that there's some good thought going into things, but like not necessarily threatening. And Hirata, it's kind of weird that every time I watch one of her fights, they talk about how high output as a striker she is, and I just never honestly really see it. But she's got a judo background, I do believe. She has a good counter game. And she actually is incredibly good at recovery, because she got dropped hard by Elise Anderson and managed to, like that, recover. Very impressive. And the only way we've seen Hirata lose, who is in addition to like a really good athletic, like really high level physicality fighter, is kind of at her own game when she fought Radazon, the Malaysian girl. And that was kind of like a sort of judo on judo game, almost, where she lost. And that's not what Lin's going to bring to the table. Lin is going to be what I think Hirata has prepared for a lot of her career. Someone who wants to strike with her, wants to stuff her takedowns, wants to stay at range with her. Hirata's got actually pretty good footwork, both as a pressure fighter and as an avoidance fighter. And that's why I'm taking her to win a decision. She doesn't really finish a lot of opponents, and Lin is very tough. So it's hard to see a a finish, but I do think she'll take it. And then Sebastian Cadstem versus Yuri Lapicus. I'm taking Lapicus. This feels like very much a showcase bout for the Moldovan fighter. Granted, Cadstrom is notably taller. I don't have a reach number for him, but he's 3 inches taller. 6 feet versus 5'9". So there is concerns there, but Lapicus is not exactly a guy who is unfamiliar with a reach disadvantage. He's 5'9" and fighting at weight classes where guys are like 5'11", 6 feet 6'1" sort of deal. Like he's got the idea in play. And this does feel like, a guy who's only lost to Christian Lee. Christian Lee's a really good fighter, even though I'm picking against him on the other card. I think it will handle it. So that's the one breakdowns. Now let's talk real quick about not real quick. I'm gonna bring the ideas to us. The questions I got on Discord and stuff. So first up question here is from Toby. So Toby, welcome. So Toby was asking me about the idea of weight bullying. What exactly is a weight bully? Why is it important in the sport? Whatever. What are my thoughts on it? And is it an overused term? I think this goes back to the fact that Toby has a wrestling background and is familiar with cutting boatloads of weight out in the state of California. So a weight bully is essentially someone who, in the fans' eyes, is cutting too much weight. Cutting down so much weight that they're noticeably larger to the point of it being a major advantage in the fight. So the classic weight bully, in my opinion, would be like a Joe Riggs, who every time he fought at welterweight looked absolutely huge. It was very clear that he was cutting way more weight than anybody else, because he was a well-sized middleweight. Now, at one point, had been a heavyweight. Now, granted, heavyweight Joe Riggs was a lot fatter than the Joe Riggs that we got in the UFC at welterweight and middleweight. But he was a 6 foot tall, 170 pounder who was quite huge. And I keep saying was, ignoring the fact that he fought as recently as 2019. And also has done the bare knuckle boxing thing. But in terms of his relevance to the MMA world, he fought Lorenzo Hunt at bare knuckle. How big was he for that one? That kind of interests me. Light heavyweight, which is listed at 84 kilograms. You would think I would know kilograms way better than I do living in a country. Okay, so that's only 185 pounds. Okay. So he's, bare knuckle boxing at 185, fought at 185, looked big at 185, goes down to 170, and has a fair amount of success. Like his biggest wins, he got a title shot. Mind you, the title shot was late notice because Kara Parishin got hurt, and he also didn't make weight for it. That would be another sign, is somebody who's having a hard time making the weight. So someone like a Johnny Hendricks, I guess. The thing was, I never really thought Johnny Hendricks was that big, though. I thought he just had a terrible, terrible diet. Nico Montano at women's flyweight, another example. Although that's another question mark one, because she made weight on the Ultimate Fighter TV show, which, if anything, that's the environment that a weight bully would fail in. But she managed to get that done. And I think this has come to the forefront because a lot of people are calling Cheeto Vera a weight bully. And it turns out he really wasn't, because we had him fight in California where they release fight time weigh-ins for hydration purposes, because they will ban men who cut more than 15% of their hydrated weight to make weight, like Tyson Nam did. They will not sanction them in a future bout at that weight class without seeing some kind of change in their approach. I think women, it's a slightly lower level. I think it's like 12%, I want to say. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, he wasn't one, and I think weight bullying is a insult that is used mostly just because people don't like a fighter, or they don't like that their success or whatever. Because like the truth of the matter here is, in a nutshell, while weight cutting is exceptionally evil, when it comes to MMA, it's like it shortens lifespans. It's a lot of cutting. If you can make the weight, you can make the weight. If you can't make the weight, you can't make the weight. And for some, it's an advantage, and for others, it's really not, because there are definitive downsides to cutting the weight. Like, it's not like, oh, I cut, let's go big, 50 pounds, and I made weight, and now I'm just like way stronger, way bigger than you. I'm way bigger than you, but I'm not necessarily way stronger. I'm also much, much, much more drained than the person I'm fighting who maybe cut 25 pounds. So like there's a downside to it. So it's something that will happen in MMA, but I think it's overused as a critique of a fighter that people just don't want to believe is any good. They just want to believe that he's just big. And like the thing is here, it plays a role. Like I was, for example, someone who always would say about John Jones, like that his style wouldn't work if he wasn't so tall and long. Like if he wasn't as big as he was, his style wouldn't work. And I stand by that. I do believe that's true. Like his boxing, I think, is incredibly exploitable without that. But you can't divorce that. Like it's like saying you're only a good fighter because you're a really good athlete. There might be some truth to the matter, but like, is that really a critique? And it's kind of the same with weight bullying. I had a question from Tim. 10 best fighters not to fight in the UFC. Now, I have not done an exhaustive research on this, but I'm going to go to Pride for the answers to this question, because Pride was the only place that for a long period of time had MMA action on par with the UFC. The ground that you could prove yourself to be as good as the UFC levels or better. And my number one on this is going to be the best Pride heavyweight of all time, Fedor Emelianenko. Honestly, up until the Brett Rogers fight, maybe a little bit before that, but probably the Brett Rogers fight, I believe that Fedor should have been ranked the number one heavyweight in the world. And in my opinion, he's still the GOAT because of the time he had on top of that division. Heavyweight GOAT, to be clear. The time he had on top of that division has to be respected, and in a way that no one else has done. And people will say, well, if he had gone to the UFC, he just would have gotten destroyed. I don't understand how that view has any logic behind it, to be honest. Because keep in mind, when he was in the UFC, the champions were the likes of Andrei Arlovski and Tim Sylvia. He beat both of them. They met up outside of Pride and outside of the UFC, and he easily handled Tim Sylvia. Arlovski was having a lot of success and actually had a really good round up until throwing a flying knee and getting overhand in the head and knocked out. But he beat them both. I don't understand. I'm not saying that like there's no one in the UFC. Like him versus Rico Rodriguez in Rico's prime would have been interesting. Him versus Randy Couture, that was rumored repetitively, would have been interesting. Him versus Josh Barnett, which was rumored repetitively, would have been interesting. But like we're just ignoring that he beat the two guys who were champions during his run for the most part in the UFC. And we are ignoring the fact that he did in fact beat or that he beat Big Nog, who went to the UFC and won a belt. I think that's kind of ridiculous. And he did also fight Frank Mir, but at a time where I don't think either of them were relevant both were very very washed. So I don't tend to look at that one as exemplification. Frank Mir has the weirdest career of any heavyweight, I think. So there's Fedor. I got to put him at the top. Number 2, I had a couple of thoughts. I don't know if there's an exact number 2. I don't know if there's a guy who absolutely takes that spot. I was thinking about Shinya Aoki. I was thinking about Mitsuhiro Ishida. I was thinking about Hector Lombard in his prime, but he did eventually fight in the OC, so he would be ineligible. I was thinking about Ricardo Arona. Hellboy Hansen is up there. Jay-Z Cavalcanti before the injuries derailed him. At the end of the day, I am going to go with, for this, Sergei Haratonov. And it's because I think, and again, probably a heavyweight bias here, that like heavyweight just in generally was a lot thinner at the time. And Haratonov was an amazing, amazing fighter. A guy who had exceptionally close fights with like Big Nog, who was the number 2 fighter in the world at that time. A guy who does have a win over, I believe, Fabricio Verdum during Verdum's prime. And I should have pulled up his fight fighter before this, just to make sure. But yeah, during his Pride run, we're talking about a guy who beat Verdum, beat Pedro Hizzo, admittedly a bit of a shell of Pedro Hizzo, Semi Schilt, had a very close fight with Big Nog, like I said, beat Mike Russow quite easily, knocked out Alistair Overeem, and even now is still active because, of course, he beat Tyrone Spong at Eagle FC, and has reasonably recent wins over the likes of Fabio Maldonado and Ollie Thompson, Matt Mitrione, Roy Nelson. So, like, definitely a dangerous dude. Beat Andrei Arlovsky in one of the funniest Frank Shamrock moments of all time, because this was back in the Strikeforce Grand Prix. They met in the quarterfinals, and they were talking about how no. Oh, Sergey has to get this to the ground. I'm like, a guy with a deep kickboxing background, a acknowledged heavy power shot, and Arlovsky's chin needs to take him down. Kind of ridiculous. So, who do I have at number 3 then? Well, that would be Shinya Aoki. Amazing grappler. Fantastic. One-dimensional as all hell. I want to be clear on that. One-dimensional as all hell. But an amazing pioneer of the game that is a can't-miss treat. Number 4, I've got Hellboy. Super well-rounded. Good fighter. Famous promo. Despite not necessarily being a great promo. Famously awesome promo. Brazilian fighters. Japanese fighters. That one. A guy that usually could have had, actually. And actually cut his contract when they acquired Pride. Very, very weird. So I got him at number 4. Number 5, I'm going to go with Jay-Z. Jay-Z Cavalcanti. Very short time on top. But for the time he had on top, he was amazing. One of the absolute what-if stories of MMA. In a big, big, big way. So I got that. That's my top 5. And then beyond that, I'm going to go with Ricardo Arona. Fantastic top grappler. Powerful as all hell. His leg kicks looked absolutely terrifying to take. Absolutely terrifying. Number 7, I'm going to go with Mitsuhiro Ishida. Incredible pace fighter. Great wrestler. Not much of a stand-up guy. Kind of fits that Aoki build of being a little bit one-dimensional. But a guy who got it done. Guy who did his thing. And then the last 3 spots is where things get really hard. Really, really hard. Because at this point, it's like, okay, who really didn't fight in the UFC? Because like Sakuraba did, most of the other Pride guys did, most of the Strikeforce core did. Admittedly, in some cases, well past their prime. And some other legends. So, Gonna go with Patricio Pitbull, Bellator's absolute poster child. A guy who has wins over a number of guys who are in the UFC now or were in the UFC. Fantastically violent striker. So I got him at the 8 spot. You know what? Actually, I'm going to change my mind on that. I'm going to put him at 7 and drop Ishida down to 8. And then at 9 and 10, I have got, again, some slim pickings. AJ McKee, I think, will be on this list eventually. I just don't think he's achieved enough yet, even though he does have a win over Patricio Pitbull. But at number 9, I'm going to go Douglas Lima. He's become kind of boring now, but there was a time where he was like a really, really exciting guy who absolutely was worth the price of admission. Great leg kicker. Great counter guy. And then I'm going to round the whole thing off with King Mo. Always a guy I was really weirded out by the fact that the UFC never went for him. But, world-class wrestler. Actually picked up pretty good boxing hands over the years. Injuries kind of derailed him. So, he fits in that Jay-Z Cavalcanti mode of, what if? Massive what if story. But that's my top 10. I stuck with predominantly men because women's MMA is a weird place where, the inclusion of women's MMA in the UFC has caused an absolute meteoric rise in the quality of female fighters. And as a result, anyone from before that era is just really, really hard to get in there. So Megumi Fuji, absolute shout out to a woman that was born too early, or that the universe didn't catch up to. But I do have a hard time putting her in my top 10. But she would be the one if you wanted one. So we got those done. RCS. You often don't like UFC matchmaking, so what do you look for in a well-matched fight? So when I'm looking for a really well-matched fight, it's a fight that has some level of fairness, because I'm not a fan of the squash match. Don't get me wrong. There is a place for the highlight match. There is a place for bringing in a fight that has an obvious winner and going out. But in terms of a really well done match, you're looking for someone two people whose style matches up incredibly, incredibly well to produce a entertaining fight on paper. And then you hope they go out and deliver it. And sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes there are fights that we get hyped up for that don't deliver. And I think that's still good matchmaking. I think it's a match that should have a point, that should advance the winner through the ranks, through the structure of a fight promotion. And not just be about brain trauma for no real reason. Looking at the next UFC card, Cyril Gane versus Tai Tuivasa is good matchmaking. It's a fight that the winner will advance to a point where they weren't before. They will have a brighter star. It's probably going to be a good fight. It should be a good fight. Unless Tuivasa just completely gets lost. But Tuivasa is going to bring the fight to Gane. Gane's going to have counter opportunities, don't get me wrong, but he probably won't be able to sit back there and just work it. That's good matchmaking. Further down on the card, what would be an example of bad matchmaking? Aline Perez versus Stephanie Egger. Egger is an example of bad matchmaking. I actually think Perez could be quite good. I think there's some good stuff there, but she's on the smaller end of bantamweight. Egger is on the higher end of bantamweight. Although apparently they're only 1 inch in height difference, which I refuse that Edgar is only 5'6". I don't believe it. But like, what is if Perez beats Edgar, what does that do for her? Edgar's kind of a one-trick pony, kind of very, very limited fighter. Good at certain things. Good at certain things. But also a game that doesn't really fit together, doesn't really jive. A woman who just got beaten in her wheelhouse by Mayra Buena Silva. What does that do for Aline Perez? And what does a win over Perez do for Edgar? You know, it's a debuting fighter. It's a fight that won't necessarily be bad or anything, but like it's matchmaking that doesn't overly advance a career. And that's an example. And then of course there are just like bad stylistic matchups. Like the UFC will tend to do this like, here's this counter striker who's very reliant on the opponent's aggression as a trigger to get them throwing, fighting a counter striker who's very reliant on the opponent's aggression to get to get it going, or like putting up someone like a Rick Story versus Thiago Alves always was like a highlight of like two fighters who are perfectly exciting and have had a number of good fights, but you just put them out there to have a absolutely boring, shitty fight that anyone coming into it thought that it was going to be a boring and shitty fight. So, entertaining fight, evenly matched, serves a purpose regardless of who wins. That would be my like 3 hallmarks of good matchmaking. Juliana asks, she was looking at my Twitter timeline and note that I was talking about the overrating of knockouts. Well, she says finishes, but I was specifically thinking knockouts. It was kind of brought about by the Leon Edwards thing, where like everyone's like, "Oh my God, this changes the complexion of Leon Edwards versus Kamaru Usman because he finished him after losing 3 consecutive rounds and most of the 5th round." And like people get overly pumped on that, and this goes further because people will look at a knockout and think it was an exciting fight. Doesn't have to be. Like Derek Lewis is like the great example of this. Of like every time I'm watching with like not my normal crew, or I'm watching the Twitter timeline during a Derek Lewis fight, you'll have people coming out of the woodwork being like, "I thought Derek Lewis was an exciting fighter. I thought he was a knockout artist." He's a knockout artist. Also could be absolutely boring. Like, they're not mutually exclusive. And the thing is that if you look at performance of the nights, fight of the year candidates, or not performance of the night, fight of the night and fight of the year candidates, they tend to be decisions. Decisions tend to be incredibly interesting fights because going back to my matchmaking theme, it all clicks together. It means that there was some kind of question being asked of both fighters. It means that there's some level of equality. Now, a decision can be boring and one-sided as crap. Don't get me wrong. But there's this dichotomy within the MMA fan base that, like, finish is good, decision is bad. And I've always found that to just be silly, to be ridiculous. And last question here from Fallon. Best MMA bases and gyms. So base-wise, I've always thought that wrestling is the best base for MMA because wrestling... Now, there is a worthwhile question here. Is wrestling the best base for MMA because wrestling has the most hierarchy to feed into MMA and nothing else really? Because if you're a good athlete in America, Canada, Eastern Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, and you want to pursue some kind of grappling career, wrestling is the thing. It's the thing that leads to the Olympics. It's the thing that leads to education, opportunity, and scholarships. There are, I believe, 2 people on my Discord that are products actually of athletic scholarships for wrestling to schools, one in Canada and one in the United States, including the person that's asking this question. Actually, there might be more. It's a tool to go forward that is not provided by Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Judo, although Judo is an Olympic sport. And then in the striking arts, there's more money to be made in kickboxing and boxing, to be honest. So your best crop goes there. So there is that sort of question when it comes to, is wrestling the best, or is it just that the wrestlers that we're getting in MMA are the best athletes, the best building blocks to make an MMA fighter out of? But I still think that a certain level of discipline is there, because a wrestler can dictate where a fight goes. If they want to stand with them, your wrestling will allow you to stop takedowns, will allow you to attain positions where you can utilize your striking if you've developed it. It also means that you have the option to take it down. And that's something that that is not as inherently strong in a boxer or a Muay Thai fighter or a kickboxer or a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu expert. It's not quite there. Judo to a certain degree, Sambo to a certain degree as well. And you could Sambo, actually, honorary mention of Sambo, because combat Sambo is becoming incredibly more important, which is it's almost just MMA, but narrower. So that's up there. That's an honorable mention. Even Sanchao kind of works as well too. So I would say wrestling, if I have to pick one, is your best base. And then best MMA gyms. I think it depends on you. I think it depends on what style you're developing. I've always said this, going to a good gym doesn't necessarily work. I've said this a lot with Team Alpha Male. Someone will go Slavaklaus, Vyacheslav Borshev. I think I'm saying his name right. The Slavaklaus guy went to Team Alpha Male, and I think that's actually a bad move. It's not because I believe Team Alpha Male is a bad camp. I think Team Alpha Male is excellent at turning people into scramblers, taking a wrestling game and making it a little bit more potent in terms of linking solid submissions and philosophies to it. But he's a striker who's gone to Team Alpha Male, and I don't think that that's going to work out well. So that would be an example of a mismatch of the end goal versus the gym's strengths. And as a result, that's a bad combo. But Team Alpha Male is a good gym. American Kickboxing Academy used to be the shit. Hasn't really been the shit for a while. But another good example. If I have to just go with one, it's American Top Team, because I think American Top Team is one of the few places that has produced quality in various different styles. That there is a solid support structure and development structure to make any kind of game you could imagine working in MMA work. So that's why I would go with ATT. You also have obviously James Krause's gym, Victory Athletics. You have Killcliff FC with Henry Hoof, very good gym. Team Elevation, very good. That's another thing, is the location. So Team Alpha Elevation or the old Pit Elevated in Utah, great examples of having elevation work for you and being prepared for if you get booked on a card in Utah, which was a terrible, terrible constructed card, by the way, the other week there. So, ATT is the best. Elevation, Killcliff, AKA Team Alpha Male. Gracie Philadelphia is coming up in the world as well. That's actually becoming a really, really solid gym. But obviously the limitations are where are you going to live? Where are you from? Jackson Wink had its day and then it fell. Gyms will wane and increase. Militich Fighting Systems was at one point the absolute was absolutely amazing. Like I think at one point they had what 1, 2, 3 that they had won a world title in the UFC at heavyweight, middleweight, welterweight, and lightweight, which is pretty amazing. And at one point, I think they had 3 champions at the same time because Tim Sylvia and Matt Hughes were full time with the gym, and then Rich Franklin was associated. And I may have even had 3 at one time with Sylvia, Hughes, and Pulver. And then, of course, they had the development of Robbie Lawler. So like, that was an era. That was a gym that was very, very solid for a long time. But it's about finding a place that like that that fits the style that you want to do and fights and can help you grow into it, as opposed to fighting against type. It's an important arguably it's the most important decision in an MMA fighter's entire career. And of course, there's also the financial aspects of like, can you afford to go to it? Because of course, we've been through this. Fighter pay, kind of a joke. So the UFC's heading to Paris for the next show. That was all the questions I had. UFC's heading to Paris for its next show this week. Check out ONE FC if you've got Amazon Prime TV. I think it's definitely worth your time. I hope so. I think all of the fights on that card, the MMA ones and the kickboxing ones, the Muay Thai ones, are interesting options. And I do hope that we see. I do hope. It's kind of weird because I don't necessarily wish the best for one. One is like exceptionally shady, but I do want to see something rival the UFC. I want to see the UFC participate in the Monday Night Wars scenario from pro wrestling to a certain degree, where WCW and WWF were fighting over talent, and it led to increased wages and a boom period for sports entertainment at the time. And MMA, I think, would feel something similar, because giving the UFC all the power is not, it's working out great for the UFC and not really for anyone else. And that includes fans, because we're still not necessarily getting fights that we want, and we're paying increasingly more for it. So that's, something to really keep in mind. So that'll be all for this episode of the podcast. And check out the link tree in the description of whatever you're watching here, the Acast, the Anchor, the Spotify, the YouTube. That'll give you kind of like everything you need. The Discord, my YouTube channel, various places to get the podcast, Twitter, Facebook, all that stuff. And I hope you enjoyed. And I hope the answers to the questions I gave to the people who gave them to me were solid. Talk to you next time.